Everybody, welcome into the weigh-in. We are presented by the FanDuel Sportsbook MMA breakdown on this Friday afternoon. I'm your host today, Brendan Glasheen, joined by our MMA analysts, Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. You can find these guys in the Action Network app. We're breaking down the biggest fights of UFC 290, and we're dishing out best bets. We've got 14 fights on the card, 5 main event fights, 2 title weights, which we'll get to. We've also got 5 early prelims and then 4 prelims as well. So 9 in total on the prelim side. It all goes down this weekend at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The blockbuster event gets underway at 6. And then we move our way to the prelims at 8 Eastern, main card at 10 on pay-per-view. As I said, the weigh-in is presented by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel has an exclusive offer for viewers. Get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose, terms and conditions apply. A lot to get to on the program, so let's make our way through UFC 290. We've got the main event in Alexander Volkanovski. He is the favorite as of now at FanDuel on this Friday afternoon, minus 375. Yair Rodriguez, the underdog, at plus 285. Well, as we know, Sean Zerillo, when we do the podcast on the Action Network podcast, we don't necessarily just lay the juice on the favorite. Sometimes we do. Other cases, we look to the underdog. How do you assess the fight, and how would you like to bet this particular one?
Yeah, I typically look for a way to play the underdog in almost every fight, just because as an underdog backer, that's where my mindset goes. But I couldn't really find many reasons to back Yair Rodriguez in the spot. In fact, I would actually bet and lay the juice on Alexander Volkanovski up to about minus 360 in a parlay to get me closer to about minus 380. He should have a massive grappling advantage in this fight. Should be able to land takedowns at will and then land some vicious ground and pound from the top. Not a big submission guy, but I could see Yair Rodriguez giving the back as he tries to get up. Potentially Volkanovski may have some opportunities to lock in a submission and cash a 12-1 submission prop if Yair is willing to give him those positions, but expect to see a hectic pace. When they're striking, I think you're going to see Volkanovski try to close the distance and get inside of boxing range in the pocket, as opposed to hanging out on the outside where Yair is going to be able to kick him, because that is Yair's best tool. His unorthodox kicks, his spinning attacks, flying attacks. And then as you get inside, his hands aren't really as good as his elbows and things like that. So looking for Volkanovski to have more success in the pocket, looking when they're both on the outside for Volkanovski to kick the leg, as he typically does, try to slow Yair down, immobilize him, and eventually have more success coming forward and landing combinations with his hands. But even if this is a striking fight, Volkanovski over the course of 15 minutes or 25 minutes, I should say, expects to outland his opponents by about 75 strikes. In Yair's case, it's closer to about 20 strikes. So how they separate from their opponents over the course of 25 minutes typically will lend itself to Volkanovski getting more done on the scorecards. I think the finishing upside is relatively similar. Volkanovski with the ground and pound, as I said, the ways he can finish the fight on the ground. But of the two, I think Yair has more durability, has a better chin. We've seen Volkanovski wobbled in the past, knocked down in the past. Guys like Chad Mendez, Max Holloway have hurt him. And I think that's how Yair wins this fight. I think he needs a big moment. I think he needs to put Volkanovski down and either get a club and sub or just simply knock him out with a head kick, similar basically to how Kamaru Usman was knocked out by Leon Edwards. But I think that is a low percentage outcome. I think Volkanovski, the vastly superior minute winner. And I think at some point during the fight, even though Yair has great cardio, Volkanovski might have the best cardio in the sport aside from Murad Dvalishvili. So over the course of 25 minutes, maybe Volkanovski gets hurt once. You see that live line come in just a little bit and you get a better price than you would get pre-fight on Volkanovski. If that happens at any point, I'm definitely going to add more on the current champion. But pre-fight, fine with him, as I set up to minus 360 as a straight bet and a parlay closer to minus 385. And then live betting, going to look to add some Volkanovski as well.
Excellent. Featherweight championship, as we know, Billy Ward. You can find Billy's Action Network write-up every week when there was a UFC fight, his UFC luck ratings. And we discussed this on the podcast earlier this morning, Billy, but considering what Zerillo just mentioned, you're on the same side here in terms of the fact that there's a possibility here that Volkanovski is still not quite fairly valued, and you'd be a fan if more money comes in on Rodriguez and we get a better line here.
Yeah, earlier in the week we were seeing a lot of money start to come in on Rodriguez. Just people like to bet big underdogs. It's always more fun. And I almost thought we could get Volkanovski down to maybe minus 325 or so. I would definitely bet his money line there. I'm with Sean. If I had to pick a straight money line sign, it would still be Volkanovski, even at his current odds. But what I really like, and this is my favorite thing about the FanDuel betting options, is the round 4, round 5, or by decision, all at minus 120. For a lot of the same reasons Sean mentioned. He's clearly the better minute winner. The biggest risk to Volkanovski is, a spinning, crazy, jumping, leaping attack from Rodriguez. Those are really hard to sustain for 25 minutes. Rodriguez might, in theory, have just as good cardio as Volkanovski, but his style just uses so much more energy. It's a lot easier to shove someone against the fence and beat him up with your hands than it is to jump off the cage and twist around and throw flying knees and all that other craziness. So I think the stoppage upside is probably pretty even between the two, but Rodriguez has most of it early in the fight, whereas Volkanovski, if he's going to get a stoppage, he's probably not just going to flatline him with one punch. It'll probably be, accumulated damage over the course of the fight. So round 4 or 5 decision, really the same logic as Volkanovski live, where we're just expecting to get a better price, but needing him to win late. That's the way I'm playing it. But I honestly have no problem with his money line if you just want to make it easy on yourself. Feels like a pretty safe bet. I think the minus 375 we're seeing now is probably the best we'll get as the sharper money comes in on the favorite closer to fight time.
Zerillo, I meant to ask you, have you targeted a parlay piece yet, or is that something that you'll come up with closer to when the fight gets going? Well, at some point tomorrow, I should say.
I went with Cameron Saman at about minus 550, facing a guy coming in off of Alaska FC. His opponent does have a big reach advantage over him, but major durability concerns a lot of these guys from Alaska FC. They come to the UFC. Jordan Wright, the Beverly Hills Ninja, an example. They take one big punch and they absolutely melt. This guy was in The Ultimate Fighter, fighting at 125 pounds, got hit once by Carcar France, got finished within 30 seconds. So just think Cameron Saman, his fighting style, his durability, as a prospect, the fact that he's 11 years younger than his opponent. There's a lot of things going for him. Short notice debutant as well for his opponent. But that age angle in particular, it pops up a few times in my article. Fighters, when there's at least an 8-year age gap between UFC opponents, the younger man tends to win about 10% more often than the betting market lines them. And when that gap grows to 11 years, the discrepancy is closer to 13%. So the younger fighter typically undervalued relative to the odds market when you have a big age gap between two fighters. So Cameron Saman, 11 years younger against a short notice debutant, set a lot of math in his corner for being the right side.
Okay, very good. We will work our way to the flyweight championship momentarily, but first we got to grind and find. We are talking underdogs for UFC 290. Just generally speaking, Zerillo, is this a good card for underdogs? I know we'd like to discuss if just generally speaking, big picture, looking at the card, is it a better card for that, or do you only see a few?
No, this is a tough one because we have a lot of squash matches on this card. Big favorites like Bo Nickel, Tetsuya Taira, guys who are facing, as I said, with the Saman fight, short notice debutantes. And, their original fights were essentially canceled and they're being handed an opponent they're expected to finish. So when you get a card like that, when there's a lot of fights that were not original bookings, I would say it's probably not a good card for underdogs unless one of them ends up popping. We had Elvis Brenner win last week as a plus 600 underdog against blanking on the fighter he beat. Billy would have it. Oh, Garam Kutadal, that was a big upset last week. So the underdogs have been absolutely shining in recent weeks, but yeah, there's a lot of huge favorites on this card because they're just going against guys who aren't necessarily UFC level or might have been signed to Contender Series already. We're expected to compete for UFC contracts, but weren't expected to fight a fighter of this caliber. So yeah, it's a lot of steps up in competition for these fighters. My favorite underdog on the card, though, Shannon Ross at plus 125 or so. I like him down to about plus 115, made him plus 105. He has a 4-inch reach advantage here. He is the more skilled fighter, the better striker. I think his opponent probably has the grappling advantage and maybe more submission upside, probably more durable as well. But in terms of minute winning over the course of 25 minutes, in terms of overall finishing upside, I would say it is reasonable, reasonably the same in terms of finishing upside, but Ross, clearly the better minute winner. The one concern with Shannon Ross is the same concern I always have betting on him. He is a bit chinny, and saying he's a bit chinny is being generous. Anytime he gets hit, I'm worried he's going to get folded up and go out. The UFC, though, might have handed him the only guy who I'm not super concerned about knocking him out, and Aguilar, who doesn't have much punching power, has no knockouts on his career record, and as Billy pointed out on our Action Network podcast earlier, might have the shortest reach in UFC history at 62 inches. So, Shannon Ross here, size advantage against the guy who probably could compete at 115 pounds if the division existed. The skill advantage, just worried about him getting put out with, any shot or potentially submitted, but plus 125, it's already baked into the line.
Oh, speaking of reaching, Billy, would you like to tell everybody what you said to us this morning?
Which one was that, Brendan?
About reaching.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're going to get hit by a guy with a reach that short, you're probably in the wrong business. Just, you gotta stay on the outside. That's a huge edge.
It's T-Rex arms.
Good life business advice for these, for this particular profession. Again, as Arillo said, there's not a bunch of edges when it comes to underdogs. Where are you reaching as far as a dog?
Honestly, kind of similar situation. I'm betting Marcin Prachnio, who, if there's a concern, it's that he gets flatlined in the early going by Vitor Petrino. Petrino is a big, jacked, brawling style fighter. I watched both his Contender Series fight and his UFC debut, and I don't think I saw a jab, just all wild hooks swinging for the fences. But Marcin Prachnio has had success against guys like that in the past. He just beat William Knight in what might have been the worst UFC fight in a very long time by staying on the outside, kicking his calf, running away. Fought Ike Villanueva, similar situation. Villanueva, very tough brawler, big power. Prachnio kind of stayed safe on the outside. Even Khalil Roundtree, to an extent, is a similar style of matchup for him. And he's a karate style guy, which means he's pretty defensively sound, and he really likes to counter strike. So as Petrino's stepping in with these big shots, as long as Prachnio doesn't get hit, he should be able to pick him apart with the counters. This is another one. You could also take it live. I think if there's a risk to Prachnio, it's that Petrino catches him in the early goings. The longer this one goes, the better I'll feel on the Prachnio side. If Prachnio wins round one, you're not going to get as good of a price, but I'd say he's close to a lock to then carry it out. If he loses round one but is still alive, then you get a better price. So kind of works either way. I also just really like Prachnio's leg kicks. If there's one way to take out a guy who's stepping in, putting all of his weight on his front leg as he bombs on you, kick that leg out, he doesn't have much left. So, plus, basically 2-1 odds. Might be able to get better odds on the live line, which I wouldn't hold against anyone, but it's more than enough for me pre-fight as well.
Yeah, I kind of like Prachnio by decision too. Plus 410 is where I projected it. You can get about plus 550 on that prop. So a longer fight, I think, certainly favors Prachnio, and a decision prop plays right into that.
All right, let's go to the Flyweight Championship. We have Brandon Moreno, the favorite, at minus 194. This was over minus 200, minus 205, and that's money's been coming in on the other side here. Moreno now a shorter favorite, but still pretty significant. And then you have Alexander Pantoja at plus 156. There are your round over-unders as well. Zerillo, kind of the same question as I had from the previous co-main event that we discussed. How do you assess the fight, and how would you like to bet it?
Yeah, if there's one fighter on the main card out of the 10 fighters who I want to bet on the money line, it would be Alexander Pantoja. Guy typically underrated, I feel like, by the betting markets. He is a nasty finisher, similar to a degree to Charles Oliveira, in that he aggressively looks to take the back, choke you out, but also he's not so much as concerned with minute winning as he is in damaging you and trying to progress towards a finish, which is what judges are scoring. They're scoring damage, and they're scoring damage that is progressing towards a finish. Now, Pantoja is 2-0 in this matchup history, but the last fight, I believe, came in 2018. Moreno has certainly improved since that fight. Hard to tell how much Pantoja has improved over that time. Kind of hard to tell how much Moreno has improved because he mostly has fought the same opponent multiple times in Davison Figueiredo, who Figueiredo, we have to be honest, has sort of declined over the course of that trilogy as well, quadrilogy. So in terms of how I evaluate the fight, it really is kind of Pantoja early, Moreno late. And I think Pantoja, particularly when they're dry, can absolutely get back takes, lock in a body triangle, hunt for the finish. And as a result, I do think Pantoja inside the distance at about plus 350. Pantoja to win round one 11-1, Pantoja to win in round 2, 16-1. I think those are all viable bets because I think the majority of his win equity is tied to an earlier round finish or not really getting involved down the stretch. I don't believe he's ever been past the 15-minute mark in his career. And that's all Moreno has done of late is go in longer fights, use his durability and elite cardio to extend past opponents and then take over down the stretch and win minutes. So yeah, for me, it's Pantoja the early round props. And then I'm probably going to look to roll into a live bet on Moreno. I'd say after round 2, round 3, the final 10 minutes, certainly when Pantoja has never been to, but even the final 15 minutes, I think should certainly favor Moreno. So if he doesn't get it done in 10 minutes, which is where I'm betting him to do it, I think it's probably Moreno's fight later on. But, he's won decisions in the past, and I could see this being competitive again.
Again, I can't stress this enough. Great resources, Billy's write-up, the luck ratings write-up on actionnetwork.com. Great insight here. So to more, kind of working, piggybacking off Zerillo, based on that analysis, Billy, you're in the same boat. You think there's value on Pantoja now?
I am, and we've seen the market react to that a little bit. I think in the luck ratings, I had Pantoja at plus 170, plus 175, something like that. But we're now seeing plus 156 on FanDuel. So with that plus 156, Sean's convinced me to an extent here. I would probably go ahead and play that, Pantoja in rounds 1, 2, or 3 prop on FanDuel at a better line. I don't know exactly what that is off the top of my head. Certainly, if you can get 170, 175 on Pantoja, that's enough for me. I don't think him winning late or winning a decision is the craziest thing. Both guys are 3-3 in the UFC in decisions. We haven't seen Pantoja go 25 minutes, but usually flyweights can handle that pretty well. Like I can't recall seeing a flyweight get super gassed at the end of a fight. So I don't have that same concern that I would if those were bigger fighters. But the biggest selling point for me is when we've had UFC trilogies and the same fighters won both of the first 2 meetings, only been 8 of those as far as I'm aware. But the fighter that won the first 2 is 6-2 in the third. One of those exceptions was Rampage Jackson versus Wanderlei Silva, when Silva was juiced to the gills during the first 2, and the third one was post-drug testing. So obvious disclaimer on that one. And yes, Pantoja's a little bit older, but he's still only 33. I don't think this one is quite to the point where we can say he's slipping, whereas Moreno's not. So we've seen him beat him twice. One of those technically an exhibition, but for whatever reason, he seems to have his number. So to get underdog money on that just feels like a gift. Again, round 1, 2, and 3 prop on FanDuel, pretty juicy, or just take the money line, especially if you can find 170 or 175.
All right, good stuff. Again, we've got 2 main events this week, so extensive breakdown. Moving on to Victory, Predictory, our favorite props. Zerillo has several. He will give out one on this show, but if you need more, go to the Action Network podcast, which is also presented by our friends at FanDuel, I may add. Zerillo, but if you had to pick one, where are you landing? Oh, Sean, we can't hear you, pal. Sorry. You're muted. There you go. For a second, I thought that was just me, Billy, as we're just staring at the camera and I'm looking at you and then you're looking at me and oh, that's fun. That's live television, everybody, or live streaming these days. Go ahead, Sean.
It's what you get when you got landscapers showing up on the Friday in the middle of a show, So
we're honest on this program.
It's you never know what twists and turns you're going to get, but Jimmy Crute, Alonzo Menifield would be my fight to target from a prop perspective. There's 3 ways that I'm interested in playing this fight. The first would be the over 1.5 rounds at around a pick'em price. We saw this fight play out at UFC 284 back in February, the same card as Islam Makhachev and Alexander Volkanovski, and it was a wild pace. And Alonzo Menifield typically is capable of finishing anybody in the first round, 12 of his 13 wins inside of 6 minutes. But Jimmy Crute took that damage, and he actually was winning the first round up until he got knocked down at the end of the round. And then Menifield seemed like, he had his wits more about him in round 2, won that round. Crute was winning round 3, but Menifield also grabbed the cage as he was being taken down. And that basically made it a 10-8 round for Crute and made the fight a draw. So I think if you run that fight back and kind of rewatch the fact that Crute was winning minutes when both were fresh, winning minutes as Menifield tired, only really lost minutes when he got hurt. Yes, he's absolutely capable of getting hurt again, but I think the more times you play this out, Jimmy Crute's minute winning ability should be closer to about 60% in this fight. I mean, I basically made him 60%, 61% in the last fight. This fight, I have him around 59%. So I've only downgraded his odds by about 2%. His money line for the last fight was between -160 and -170. Here he's -130. So, and he was around -110, -120 earlier in the week. So those -110 numbers were great. I still like him at -130. I think you get a better live price on Crute after round one. So I'd be patient. I would wait. Books were able to place the same game parlay. Crute in the over 1.5 rounds. I think I got about +210 on that, but just the over 1.5 rounds, I think at a pick 'em price is a solid bet. Crute live after round one, the fight to go to a decision at +260, and then Crute to win by decision +600. I think all of those are solid bets, considering we already saw one of the crazier iterations of this fight play out. They made it to a decision. Now I think we might get an even more tepid pace where Crute is more measured, goes to his wrestling more reliably, kind of keeps things, in top position and relatively safe, especially after the first round. So minute winning, longer fight, all favors Jimmy Crute, in my opinion, especially after round one, though, because we typically see Alonzo Menifield gas out after about 6 minutes. So live betting, great fight. Prop perspective, still think the props relative to the first time this fight was made should have been, dejuiced just a little bit more. So overs, and any over favors Crute.
More on Crute and Menifield from Billy later on in the show. And as you said, that it was Rillo's referencing UFC 284 when these fighters squared off earlier. I think that was in February. But back
in Australia.
In Australia. Okay, there you go. So that was back in the winter. If you need that as a reference, or if you want to go back and look, the data checks out. Billy, you're also turning to the prelims card for a prop.
Yeah, another fight that Sean's already mentioned, the Shannon Ross Jesus Aguilar fight. I'm with Sean on the money line side that he's taking. I'm also looking at the under 2.5 rounds. I just see this as a very binary fight. Sean, pointed out the upside for Ross in terms of the striking, the reach, the athleticism. Aguilar is a very dangerous submission fighter, though. Not great wrestling, so it's really hard for him to get the fight to the ground. But once he does, his opponents are usually in trouble. And that's one of the benefits of his shorter frame. When you're grappling guys like that, if they lock up anything on you, there's no room to get out. Some of these long, skinny guys, you can kind of find a way out of a triangle, find a way to break a Kimura grip, pry the arm over your head from a rear naked. If Aguilar is able to connect his hands, you're not going anywhere. So this feels like, to me, if he gets a takedown early or pulls guard or pulls mount like he did in his last fight and then finds his way on top, Aguilar finds a way to win it. If he doesn't, I expect Ross to put him out. Not that Ross has huge power, but he has just such an advantage where he should be landing so many more strikes that I don't really see how Aguilar survives 2.5 rounds of that. So with Sean on the money line side, if I was playing that, but I like the under 2.5 rounds. Always fun to bet the flyweight unders too. They seem to usually be juiced a little bit less than they should be, just based on historical data and what we assume is going to happen with the little guys fighting.
Really quick, because I'm reading our YouTube chat and someone has asked a question on Ross. Any interest in a decision play or possibly money line on Ross?
Yeah, so I bet Ross on the money line, but also, and I just believe I just added it. I'm not sure if it's in the action app yet. Shannon Ross by decision. I actually like that bet quite a bit. +450. I made that line about +250. So I think there's a substantial price disagreement between where I have Ross and his minute winning in the fight versus where the market has it. I know Billy's on the finish prop, but if this fight does go 15 minutes, I think Ross is the much likelier minute winner and certainly want some decision at +450. So yes, Ross money line decision. I have about a half unit on the money line and, a 1/10 of a unit on the decision prop just to figure out the balance of where I'd allocate those.
I would also say with that one, I think FanDuel offers it, but you can have the finish no bet lines where your bet voids if it doesn't go to a decision. I think Ross is great on that, right? Because there's no way, I shouldn't say no way. There's a very slim chance Aguilar wins a decision. So that way you get your money back if Aguilar pulls a submission out of nowhere, or if, Ross stops him too, but it only grades if you go to a decision, in which case Ross should be the overwhelming favorite. No idea what that line is off the top of my head, but similar concept.
Okay, thanks to M. Griff for weighing in and checking out the show. We've got a parlay to share before we leave. However, we do have best bets, inside joke. It could be just a final bet. And this, my friends, folks that look forward to the weigh-in whenever we have the show, this is one of the finest final bet descriptions you'll get from Sean Zerillo here. He's on Robbie Lawler. Explain.
Yeah, Robbie Lawler, final bet of his career. Final time I will get a chance to bet on Robbie Lawler. I'm not even a particularly big Robbie Lawler fan, but I respect all that he's done for the sport. How long he's been around to be a champion, but to also have the longevity, I think is actually pretty rare. We don't see a lot of these former champions stick around and have long careers after the fact. But the UFC doesn't always do the best job matchmaking these retired vets or these vets who are going into their last fight. But I do think they handed Robbie Lawler a winnable matchup here for his last fight against Nico Price, who's won 3-1 in his past 4 bouts. Might be on his way out of the UFC too, especially if he loses his fight to Lawler. Price has had multiple knee surgeries, been through a ton of wars himself, did not look great in his last fight against Phil Rowe. And, Lawler was competitive with Brian Barberena for about a round before he eventually got overwhelmed on volume and knocked out. But to me, these are 2 older guys who should have a competitive striking fight with one another. If Price wants to hit takedowns, he might be able to get them. And I think that's where his favoritism comes in. But it's really not the type of fight where you see these fighters go for optimal win paths because they have respect for their opponent and they want to give their opponent the fight that they think they deserve. And I would expect Nico Price, who does not have the best fight IQ, to probably let Robbie Lawler strike it out with him. So the crowd, the judges, I think they're all going to be looking for a reason to pull for Robbie Lawler. But this should just be a close and competitive striking fight that you're getting one guy at 2-1. And honestly, if it was Price on the other side at plus 200, I would be betting him too. I think this fight is just going to play out close and competitively, and Lawler is going to have a good chance to either steal a decision or potentially knock out Price, who his durability is slipping as he gets into his later years. So yeah, projected this around plus 180. That's about where I'd bet it down to. I know this line has dropped around the betting market, but if Price doesn't shoot takedowns and grapple, it's going to look like a value bet.
Follow Zerillo on baseball. This is like the opposite when he wants to bet like a 38-year-old who's making like a weird final appearance because he's on the verge of getting cut or waived. But he's
there's something different about betting, Zach Greinke and he goes out there and gives up 10 runs than there is about betting a 41-year-old who gets knocked out on the first exchange of the fight. Like that, it's so much worse when you bet a fight to go to a decision or you bet a money line and literally the first punch of the fight, they're out cold lying on their back. I've had a few of those and I'll tell you, it's not fun. So yeah, Dan Ige against Gavin Tucker. I had that fight to go to a decision, ended within 8 seconds. I still remember it all these years later.
That's the pain that we're used to when you bet. Those of you that are new to the UFC world or whatever sport it may be. Billy Ward, as I teased a moment ago, you are going to weigh in on Crute and Menfield, and you like Jim Crute.
I do. Before we get to that one, just to Sean's point about Nico Price's fight IQ, Price was one of the last guys to fight Donald Cerrone before Cerrone retired. Price should have won that fight. He won 2 rounds to 1. Got a point deduction. I don't even remember what for. And I have never seen someone so excited when they read out the draw. Like, this was the best possible scenario for Nico Price, who literally didn't want to beat Donald Cerrone because he respected him so much. Like, he didn't even want to win. So, I'm not saying he doesn't want to win against Robbie Lawler. I'm saying his priorities are probably put on a fun fight, make 50 grand in a bonus, and then maybe third might be win. So I'm not doing it because I can't bet on anyone in their 40s in a fist fight. That's just ridiculous. But I get it. Like, I get where you're coming from, Sean. Anyway, moving on to mine, Jim Crute. I think he's all the way to minus 132 on FanDuel now, which has shifted this firmly into last bet territory rather than best bet. Earlier in the week, he was my best bet. Sean really broke down this fight, but we saw a draw last time, which makes me think, should be very close. But Crute is 8 years younger. Sean earlier in this show gave us some of the stats on fighters 8 years younger, 10% edge, all that. But if we know guys were very close 4-ish months ago, 5 months ago, one of them is 8 years younger, should be getting better. The other one is 35, probably already seen his best fights behind him. Not that he's washed by any stretch, but I don't think we're seeing a lot of improvements or a lot of, revolutions in Alonzo Menifield's game. And then the other factor, Jim Crute was out for more than a year before the last fight. He had some knee surgeries, had some injuries. We saw it with, I bet against him a couple weeks ago, Jamal Emmers. We saw it with Jamal Emmers. First fight back from the ACL injury, looked real bad, real slow. Second fight looked a lot better. I think we could see a similar thing with Crute, where his footwork's a little bit better, his speed's better. He's able to avoid some of those bombs from Menafield to a much better degree than he was in the first fight. And then just skill for skill, he's way better. He's got the grappling, he's got the wrestling, probably a better technical striker. So as long as he avoids the power, should be his fight. Sites with the same game parlay. I would even take this and over like half a round just to get it to even money, stuff like that, because Menafield's most dangerous early. But I like the money line. I'd still bet it at -132 if you missed it earlier in the week. But if you missed it earlier in the week, you should probably be reading the luck ratings, because this was the one I gave out that I was most confident in that piece.
Did I have this right that you had said, and maybe you said this morning, that earlier in the week you could have found in the market Crute as an underdog?
Yeah, slight on like -105 to Menafield, -115. I tweeted it too. This was my free CLV play for the week. I'm trying to do one of those every Monday for UFC, just who I think it's going to move against. And I think it was -110 when I tweeted it. The -132 on FanDuel is probably the best odds. I think he's as high as like -150 other places now. So definitely moves that way. Sharp money is telling you everything you need to know. Love Sean's angles on the overs. Crute in round 3 or by decision is a little scary, because a second round finish wouldn't surprise me much, but a lot of different ways you can play it. I'm happy with just the money line.
And likely probably a very good live bet too, because Menafield is very dangerous in round 1. Good judo, hard to take down. So it's likely, they get stuck at striking range. And from there, it's closer to a 50-50 run.
You guys are very interested. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I would say dream scenario on that. Menafield clips him once or twice early, empties the tank trying to finish him, and then it's got nothing left for the rest of the fight, which we see all the time with Alonzo Menafield. That's like Alonzo Menafield in a nutshell. So
you guys are very interested in. No, don't apologize to me. You have way more important things to say than I do. My takeaway was you guys really like the live betting angles this week, which that doesn't happen every week, right?
At least on my end, I try to avoid giving out too many live ideas on cards that I'm not sure people will actually be watching, because some of these UFC fights in recent weeks have been a little bit less interesting. On weeks like this, where I assume everyone who cares enough to bet it is also watching the pay-per-views, I'm just a little more comfortable giving those out.
Oh. Anything to add there, Zerillo? I'm more so, I guess what I'm getting at is how you're evaluating why, okay, I know the line, each fight is its own commodity, but why this week may just stand out as a better live betting week than others.
Yeah, no, just as my dogs go nuts because my wife came home, just cardio dynamics between the fighters. I think the Pantoja fight in particular, the fact that he's never been past the 15-minute mark in his career. Anytime you get a fighter in a main event or in a 25-minute fight and they've never been past 15 minutes, and Pantoja on top of that doesn't have great cardio even in 15-minute fights, I'm always going to probably try to look to bet against them in those 5-round fights. Sean Strickland last week in the main event against Abbas. Abbas had never been in a 5-round fight. He faded after about 3.5 minutes. I think most people thought he'd get to at least the 10-minute mark before fading off like that. But it was pretty embarrassing to have 4 minutes of cardio in a main event. But anytime. It's not just the fact that they're in a main event that's a longer fight. It's also the spotlight, the adrenaline dump. There's a lot of things that play into that are not just cardio dumping. It's, using your cardio that you normally have. These adrenaline dumps tend to happen in these title fights as well. And Billy could speak better to that than I can, but it's just noticeable. Sometimes guys vastly underperform in title fights.
And I've talked about it a little bit with some of these. The way we evaluate cardio, I think it really should be more based on just your style and how much energy it takes. And we have a lot of guys who are kind of energy hogs, right? Menafield and Petrino, both brawlers. Yair Rodriguez, his best chance is to make it a crazy wild fight where he's throwing everything against the wall. So when we have a lot of those fighters on a card, kind of hope one or two of them looks good early and then fades, which just makes awesome live opportunities. And if they don't, there's no shame in just passing, right? Because you haven't lost anything. So yeah, with Sean, I think the cardio angle is important. Just wanted to point out that sometimes it's not cardio in terms of who would, run a 5K faster, but just the way in which they manage their gas tank is important.
I should mention the Crute fight too. I was looking back at my Reddit for the first booking. I said to wait to live bet Crute, not only because of the cardio angle, but also he was coming off an injury. I wanted to see how the knee looked. Yeah. Sometimes these guys are coming back from layoffs, or you just want to see how they look. And even Alexander Romanov last week, right? Like looked terrible on the scales, but once the fight started, it was like he's not looking so bad cardio wise in terms of the weight. So yeah, sometimes there's, a difference in terms of the lead up to the fight or an injury that they had that was pre-existing. And you just kind of want to evaluate them and get more information. It's, if you're smart about it and you're careful with your bankroll management, I think this is the best sport in the world for live betting. I really do. I don't think it's close, because with repetition, I think there's edges that you can only see that you can't really quantify, and you really need to like be able to recognize patterns, and it happens week after week. But if you do this for multiple years, I think eventually you will discover that you have an edge on something. And whether it's, a technique that you see, or, a guy, for example, with the Volkanovski fight, if you get a better live price on Volkanovski and he hasn't started wrestling yet, what do you want? I mean, I think that's the thing that makes him look like the favorite, right? So if they strike it out for 2 rounds and you get Volkanovski at -175 and he hasn't shot a takedown yet, well, that's something that you can identify going in, where, okay, this fight is going to look closer if he doesn't shoot takedowns, but if he hasn't shot one yet, that may be an edge for you.
Real quick, I don't want to spoil too much of our expert series on UFC betting, which is coming out in a week or two, but this is almost so basic that I think Sean glossed over it, but in no other sport is the score hidden. I think that's actually probably the biggest factor with live betting, because if you can say, hey, I think, these two are 1-1, but the live market has it as if it were 2-0, that's obviously a big edge. Like, it's not like you're watching a baseball game and you just have to guess how many runs have been scored. We know. So it's really hard to judge UFC fights, but it's not all that hard to judge them better than the sports books are doing right now.
And the books are all over the place. If you have multiple books up, somebody might put up plus money on one side and somebody might put up some money up on the other side. And you don't even have to do any work. You could just arb and take the free juice. Yeah, it's like there's not one set person handicapping these fights live. It kind of is very opinionated. And like baseball or basketball or anything, they have the score, they have the time left, they know who's in possession of the ball. They're letting the models do the work. This is manual. This is manual live setting, and you got about 30 seconds of actionability there. So you're going to get some massive edges sometimes.
Excellent. Excellent breakdown for folks that might be new to UFC betting. As we promised, there is a UFC 290 FanDuel parlay we would like to share. Here it is. Volkanovski money line. So this kind of plays off to Zerillo's point as a money line piece with something else. In this case, this is what we put together. Pantoja money line. And then we've talked about Jim Crute like for 20 minutes. So imagine he'd probably be in there. This comes out to plus 469. Either one of you want to quickly weigh in? We hit a lot of the points, but just to kind of bring it all home.
Just in terms of how I parlay things, I'm looking to get 2 things: reduce my exposure, get it over even money. So wouldn't personally need to include Pantoja in here, right? I would probably just go Crute and Volkanovski, take the plus money, put a half unit on it and run. But we do like Pantoja quite a bit. Just trying to juice this thing up, get it to, something that's nice and actionable. You could put a 1/10 of a unit on it and still win close to a half unit. Could put 0.2 and win almost a unit. So yeah, nice price there on 3 fighters that we have kind of a consensus opinion that each of them are undervalued to a degree. So I just think it's 3 fighters Billy and I agree on. It's tough to find consensus opinions across 14 fights, especially when 4 of them are lined at like -1,000. So yeah, just 3 fighters we like. And I think Jimmy Crute, Billy and I would agree at -110 was the best bet on this card, unquestionably. But now that it's floated up to -130, you might get -110, you might get plus money after round 1. So yeah, it was tough to identify a best bet on this card, but I think with the way we talked about the Crute fight, it's pretty easy to see that we like the stylistic matchup for him. And it's a fight that we already saw once. Like, it's in terms of, we just talked about live betting and getting information, right? Getting information from the matchup that you're watching. You can't have much better information than seeing the exact fight play out 6 months ago, but also knowing that one guy's younger and has the age advantage and is now another half-year removed from knee surgery. Like, anything about this rematch sort of is an advantage for Crute, in my opinion.
All right. Very good. Let's show everybody the picks from first Sean Zerillo. Here you go. Volkanovski is a moneyline parlay piece. We kind of just hit that with their consensus parlay, Billy and Sean. Shannon Ross, Pantoja by finish, Crute, Menefield over, total rounds, and then Robbie Lawler. See you later, Robbie. One last ride. And then Billy Ward's picks to wrap up the program. His main event angles, he's got Volkanovski in rounds 4, 5, and by decision. He's got Pantoja money line, also for Chino. Ross and Aguilar to go under total rounds, and then Jimmy Crute on the money line. As a reminder, FanDuel has an exclusive offer for viewers. Get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Terms and conditions apply. Folks, make sure you tune into the fights tomorrow starting at 8 Eastern to see how your picks play out, and then stay up to date in the Action Network app. It's a big point. I mean, we talk about the app all the time. Download the app, and I get it. That can be regurgitated, repetitive. This is an important one, especially with the live angles that these guys might be able to provide, and if they get it in the app in time, which is, I realize is difficult to do, as they highlighted, but want to be in the app during the fights if you're into this kind of stuff. So be sure to do so. Thanks for tuning into the weigh-in. Thanks to Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, Hutton behind the scenes, getting us up and running today. Brendan Glasheen, have a great weekend. Thanks for bearing with us. Dogs and sunlight and noise. You'll have a great weekend. Enjoy your card, and we'll talk to you again real soon here on the weigh-in.